It looks like we have a few more people logging on, which is great. So again, welcome. We will start here shortly. While you're waiting, feel free to scan the QR code on your screen to learn a little bit more about MDClone and our innovative technology that allows for third-party data collaboration. A few housekeeping items. Lines will be muted. However, if you have questions, please submit them in the question box throughout the program, and we will have a Q&A at the end with Daniel and Peter. A little bit about us before we get started. MDClone connects life science organizations to rich patient data needed to test hypotheses, validate studies, improve care optimization, develop clinical trials, and create life-saving therapies. Through our secure and controlled platform with embedded synthetic data technology, life science organizations are able to identify sites, analyze robust structured and unstructured real-world data, and explore populations of interest with incredible detail and flexibility. I'm very excited to be here today with our VP of Strategy, Daniel Blumenthal, and our Director of Client Success, Peter Calderon. And they'll be telling you a little bit more about these opportunities and helping us understand the importance of this type of data. Stay tuned, and we will start momentarily.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our coffee talk today. I'm Daniel Blumenthal, our Vice President of Strategy at MDClone, coming to you from Chicago today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Peter Calderon, our Director of Customer Success. We'll be joined by Peter in a few moments. So today we're going to dive into the life science experience with MDClone, looking at what it means to work with MDClone, work with our partners around the world, mostly on RWE projects, real-world evidence projects. I'll say that since really the beginning of MDClone's existence back in 2016 even, we've been seeing interest from life science companies in gaining access to richer data that can be used to answer a variety of questions. Ranges from care utilization to disease prediction to even things like clinical trial enrollment and optimizing that process. But in the last year or so, we've started engaging with these companies, or life science companies, to leverage a new model for real-world evidence exploration. And we've seen it to be quite impactful at providing richer insights, really at a faster speed. So when we've worked with life science companies, we've understood several ways in which data and insights are gathered today. And it really follows typically three routes. Either the life science company will sponsor an analysis at a health system, sponsor a study where an investigator at a hospital will actually conduct the analysis on behalf of the life science company. Alternatively, the company might utilize clinical trial data that's been collected over the years for various studies that the life science company has sponsored. And another route might be utilizing aggregated data. It's typically claims data that comes from large clearinghouses. In all of these approaches, there's certainly many questions that can be answered, but they often lead companies, these life science companies, without meaningful insights in different directions. And that's either because the data isn't available. For example, in a claims database, there's just only so much that data can answer without the clinical underlying clinical data for those patient populations. Or because really the timelines to conduct these projects can be quite lengthy, from the time to one interacts with a PI investigator at a hospital and defines a protocol, to actually having the data extracted and analyzed by that PI and by that group. That can take a long time, often months and months and months, if not more like years. So MDClone came in, and we're trying to offer what we see as a new path, as really a fourth path here to gaining access to the data and ultimately the insights that are of meaning to life science companies. So our path here is to provide direct access to patient data at the source where the data is collected. We have our Atoms platform installed at health systems around the world, and that platform is loaded with rich granular longitudinal data. That data looks like clinical data elements, anything you'd see, you would expect from a hospital or health system. So it could be structured and unstructured sources. It could be clinical data that looks like labs and medications and procedures and diagnosis. It could be financial information, claims information, patient-reported outcomes. And it is organized in such a way that a user without advanced programming skills or without really advanced knowledge of the health system itself and the way they capture data, to allow those users to ask and answer questions independently. Underlying that is a lot of technology, and that's what's behind the scenes of the Atoms platform that we make available to our end users, whether those end users sit inside a hospital or whether those end users sit at a life science company. So the way the data is organized is a key part of this entire process, making it possible, again, for someone without advanced knowledge of the health system data or the codes at that health system to be able to interact with the data, have data organized in this longitudinal approach, which is really more native, the way medicine happens and the way questions get asked. Also, the way data is harmonized and curated, that includes NLP technology, that enhances the data and makes it possible for someone, again, to interact in familiar terminologies and be assured of the quality and reliability of the data. And the last piece of technology that's really quite key to this entire process is synthetic data technology, which ultimately allows an external user, someone that sits, for instance, at a life science company, to explore data directly at the source, but do so without an IRB even, and do it safely in such a way that protects the privacy of patients, but also enables really high utility of data to enable robust analyses. In other talks, we'll focus on these technology components, but today we're really focusing on the data richness and the types of questions that life science companies who are working inside MDClone's platform at health systems around the globe, those you can see here, what is their experience like? And in order to do that, what we really need to dive into is the data richness and the types of questions, again, that are being asked, that are being enabled through this data. And so again, I'm delighted to be joined by Peter Calderon to dive into ways in which life science companies have utilized the platform and this data inside at these partners around the world. And I want to dive into a use case that we're seeing over and over again at life science companies, perhaps at a high level. A new drug hits the market, and along with it comes certain indications, but is it performing as expected? And how can we better understand the utilization of that medication? So Pete, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you have an example to walk through and perhaps some other thoughts around the data that's available to life science companies. So I'll ask you to now dive into that use case, and then we can come back with questions that the audience, as I see it already, sharing with us.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, so one of the persistent topics we've seen from both life sciences and provider use of MDClone has been the ability to measure and track outcomes in use of novel drugs. A great example of this is in SGLT2s or sodium glucose cotransporters, a drug that was initially indicated for type 2 diabetes around 2012 and has since been updated to include indications for heart failure and chronic kidney disease. As you can imagine, the milieu of comorbid conditions that are prevalent in these populations gives rise to a great number of questions in context of outcomes and harm and benefit. Often the first question or pattern of questions we've seen looks at the proportion of opportunity for patient benefit and actual prescribing practice. Meaning, at a high level, can we understand what barriers are, economic or patient characteristic based, to ordering these meds? Are there contraindications? Are there other complexities to consider via data? In other studies, we see that novel drugs sometimes exert unintended pharmacological activities, leading to undesired effects. For example, there was thought to be some association of decreased bone mineral density in patients on SGLT2s, increasing the risk of bone fracture. MDClone offers end users the ability to analyze these outcomes by providing rich data sets with granular context. In the fracture risk example, providers and researchers alike have leveraged MDClone to Look at bone density measurements from DEXA scan reports via MDClone's natural language processing studio, making previously unstructured text available in a structured format in the context of all of the other data we bring in from EHRs, from claims, from other diagnostic sources. They also look at overall rate of fracture and most prevalent diagnoses at baseline. Or in specific conditions, such as chronic kidney disease patients, are these folks on guideline therapies like calcitriol or calcium maintenance? And what is the rate of fracture in that population? They have the ability to compare these fracture rates to other drug classes as well, indicated for the same milieu of conditions, for diabetes, for CKD. Other studies that come to mind, in analysis of treatment categories to outcome, treatment categories being either pharmacological or procedure-based. A handful of our clients are looking at designing pulmonary embolism response teams. And part of that is the ability to segment populations by severity on presentation in order to apply data and evidence-based directive on what is the best treatment path by severity to achieve desired outcome. For example, the ability to analyze a medication like alteplase in context of other anticoagulants, or a more intensive approach to treatment in procedures such as catheter-directed lyse or thrombectomy allows for the intersection of evidence-based analysis with a learning system approach with data. MDClone users have the ability to design questions and curate populations on their own in iterative fashion with the ability to ask a wide range of questions, leading to a great range of answers and outcomes and benefit to patients overall.
Thanks, Peter. So we've been receiving several questions throughout this session, and I want to run through some of them now. Sort of unsurprisingly, many of the questions are geared towards the use of synthetic data. It's a question we definitely get a lot from life science companies, especially. It's fairly new and novel as an approach to real-world evidence analysis. And the first question I see here is, we're trying to understand synthetic data, and in particular, can synthetic data be used for regulatory submissions? So the way we try to describe MDClone's synthetic data utility is it is an excellent enabler towards getting faster answers out of the rich data that we walk through today. Synthetic data is built from the original data. It is built by taking the original population, understanding its statistical characteristics, and then generating a brand new set of data that looks like the original data, has the same essential structure, and has the same statistical properties, such that it really can be used in any sort of analysis where the original data could be used. And in the process that life science companies and others go through to analyze that data, the idea is that any analysis can be done in the synthetic data, and at any point in time, should that user want to go back to the original data to understand, evaluate the analysis on the original data, that can happen under appropriate IRB or other processes. So while today we haven't seen regulatory submissions on synthetic data of the type that we're building, what we see all the time and the way we work with pharma companies, life science companies, is analysis happens on synthetic data, really makes a process, again, that can often take months and months and months just to get approval to see the data, have that happen much faster. You can be on top of data essentially tomorrow. Run analysis, build a model, understand the behavior of a population, and then if publication or if submission of some sort is desired, go back to the original data, essentially unblind that data, whether the health system itself, having a PI do that work, MDClone doing that work on behalf of the life science company, all are possible. So I'm moving on to another question here. There's a general question, I'll paraphrase a bit here, but essentially, are there limitations to what analyses can be performed with synthetic data? So what we usually like to say, broadly speaking, is that if the answer is in the original data, it's going to be in the synthetic data. As I mentioned just before, the way the synthetic data is generated is we take an original population and we actually build from it synthetic data that has the same characteristics. It has the same statistical properties of that original data. When the synthetic data is generated, what the algorithm, what the tool is doing is it's trying to look for statistical values in the original data. It's looking for correlations. It's looking for meaningful relationships between variables in the population. And essentially, where there are no meaningful variables, the synthetic data that's generated is going to be of poor quality. And our system actually alerts you to that effect. And the idea is that the end user, the one who's holding the mouse, in this case, the life science company and their personnel, can actually understand the utility of the synthetic data. And in that way, really the synthetic data reflects the original. If there are no meaningful correlations in the original data, the synthetic data won't have any meaningful correlations. So certainly when you look at certain rare diseases, for example, where there are very low counts of patient populations, and the synthetic data is going to have trouble creating meaningful synthetic data for large enough numbers. But as we start to build larger and larger data sets, sometimes going across some of our sites, even in some of the rare disease populations, we start to see synthetic data that does have good value for analysis for these pharma companies and the types of projects that they're undertaking. I guess I should add one thing. That utility of the synthetic data is certainly crucial. Ultimately, the synthetic data is really optimizing for privacy. And so no matter what, the release of data when it's synthetic is going to ensure that patient privacy is protected. And that's sort of this, I wouldn't say trade-off necessarily, but it is an important limitation that we are always cognizant of when we're releasing data, synthetic data to end users. All right, so moving a little bit away from synthetic data, we got a question here. Maybe we'll see if we have time for one more, but this is perhaps actually a good one to focus on. The question is, can you elaborate on what you mean by granularity of data? For a medication or a diagnosis, what is available? So maybe I'll turn to you, Pete, for that one.
Sure. So in MDClone, concepts like intent to treat or per protocol investigation for analyzing the effect of an assigned treatment can be better designed by the addition or combination of access to a wide range of data elements. So in the medication example, you have the ability to look at inpatient administered meds, investigational drugs from previous clinical trials, at-home meds, or even dispensed medications from claims beyond just the medication order. Data availability and granularity drive the utility for self-service access. Examples of properties inside of those include, quantity, duration, dose, etc. Other flexible elements of MDClone as a platform allow end users to associate diagnostic values together with code concepts. ICD-10 codes or diagnosis codes can be associated with a corresponding diagnostic lab value, like a troponin combined with an ICD-10 code for myocardial infarction. Or in other ways, we have the ability to flexibly create composite outcomes with a multitude of codes inside of our platform. For example, major adverse cardiovascular event, or MACE. There's a 3-point version, 4-point version, 5-point version. Our end users have the flexibility to combine multiple different data elements together in the ability to create an outcome for study, look at the time relation from exposure to an outcome, and leverage all of the data that is available inside of the platform coming from all of the different sources, radiology, EHR, claims, labs, etc.
Great. Thanks, Peter. So I think we'll end there. That is really a good way of, I think, describing the data availability in many ways. And really one of the next steps, and I should say really the first step that we try to engage often with life science companies is just, what are the questions you're asking, and what data do we have? Do we have the data available to answer some of those? Certainly the model that we described, the way in which an end user at a life science company will be interacting with the platform is important. The synthetic data and how it's utilized is an important thing to understand. But ultimately, we are after the ability to ask and answer questions, get richer insights at a faster pace. And so definitely invite those listening to ask us, challenge us, and see where there are opportunities to leverage our platform and again, leverage our network of health system partners around the world to explore some of your questions and hopefully dig deeper into insights. So again, thanks, Peter, and thanks everyone for joining us today.